There are some buildings you stop noticing. They don't disappear. They don't hide. They simply become part of the background, like a street sign you no longer read or a sound you no longer register. The McDonald's on Ridgeway Avenue was like that. It sat between places that changed often. A pharmacy that closed 1 year and reopened as a discount store. A car wash that worked half the time and smelled faintly of soap and wet concrete. The McDonald's never changed. Low building, flat roof, wide glass windows that reflected the street even at night. The lights were always on. Not harsh. Not flickering. Just steady. White. Even. I noticed that first. Not consciously. More like the way you notice temperature when you enter a room after being outside too long. It felt consistent. I work late. I always have. By the time I drive home, the city is quiet in a specific way. Not empty. Just reduced. Fewer cars. Longer gaps between traffic lights. The hum of distant highways instead of close conversations. At night, sounds travel differently. You hear your own engine more clearly. You hear the tires on asphalt. You hear the faint rattle inside your dashboard that never bothered you during the day. I pass Ridgeway Avenue almost every night. The McDonald's is always there when I do. The parking lot is usually empty. Sometimes there is a single car parked far from the entrance, like it arrived early or stayed too late. Sometimes there are none. But the lights are always on. I used to find that comforting. There was something reassuring about it. Like proof that not everything sleeps. Like a quiet promise that if you needed something warm and familiar at an unreasonable hour, it would still be there. I didn't think about employees, or schedules, or how late really is. I just drove past. On nights when I was especially tired, I would slow down without meaning to. My foot easing off the gas. My eyes drifting toward the windows. Inside, the tables were always clean. Chairs pushed in. Floors pale and reflective. It looked ready. Not busy. Not abandoned. Ready. That difference mattered, even if I couldn't explain why. Sometimes I'd think about stopping. Sometimes I wouldn't. Most nights I didn't. Routine has a way of forming without asking permission. You don't decide it. It settles around you. My routine was simple. Work late. Drive home. Pass the McDonald's. Notice the lights. Forget about them by the next intersection. Weeks went by like that. Then months. Nothing unusual happened. Nothing worth remembering. And that's important. Because when people talk about the moment things begin to feel wrong, they often describe a clear turning point. A sound. A sight. A moment that stands apart. This wasn't like that. There was no moment. There was only a slow shift in awareness. A quiet accumulation. Like realizing, one night, that you've been holding your breath without knowing when you started. I think the first real change was when I stopped seeing the building as a place. It began to feel more like a constant. Like the moon. Or the sound of your own thoughts when everything else goes quiet. The lights were still on. They always were. And at the time, that felt completely normal. The first time I really looked at the lights, I was stopped at the red light across the street. Not rolling. Not slowing. Completely still. The engine idled. The clock on the dashboard glowed faintly. Everything inside the car felt sealed off from the night. I don't know why my eyes stayed there longer than usual. The windows of the McDonald's reflected the streetlights behind me. So for a moment I saw two versions of the world layered together. The empty dining area. And the road, stretched and bent across the glass. There were no people inside. That wasn't strange. What was strange was how evenly lit everything was. No darker corners. No shadows under tables. No sense that the lights were working harder in some places than others. It looked less like a restaurant and more like a display. As if someone had turned the place on, but not for anyone. The light turned green. I drove on. I remember thinking, briefly, that they must leave the lights on overnight for cleaning. Or security. Or because it was cheaper than turning them off and on again. The explanation came easily. It settled my thoughts the way routine always does. The next night, I noticed the same thing. Same brightness. Same clean stillness. And the night after that. At some point, without deciding to, I began to measure time by it. I would glance at the clock as I passed. 12:47 a.m. 1:12 a.m. 2:03 a.m. The lights never changed. I wasn't checking on purpose. It felt more like confirming something I already knew. There was a comfort in that consistency. A strange one, but real. The city itself changed more than that building did. Some nights there were sirens far away. Some nights the wind carried smells from places I couldn't see. Some nights felt heavier than others, like the air had weight. The McDonald's did not respond to any of it. It didn't feel alive. It felt maintained. One night, I took the turn into the parking lot without thinking. My hands did it before my thoughts caught up. The tires made that soft crunching sound on gravel near the curb. The headlights swept across the empty lot, briefly painting white lines and oil stains on the ground. I stopped near the entrance. I didn't get out. I sat there with the engine running, listening to the low hum and the faint ticking sound it always made when idling too long. Up close, the lights felt brighter. Not painful, just present. I could see my own reflection layered over the glass. My face faint, ghosted into the interior. Still no people. The doors were unlocked. I knew that because I could see the handles clearly, resting in their neutral position. I thought about opening the door. Not because I was hungry. I wasn't. It was more like curiosity. The mild kind. The kind you don't question. But something about the stillness stopped me. Not fear. Just a hesitation. The place felt like it was waiting for something very specific. And I wasn't sure it was waiting for me. I backed out and left. On the drive home, I told myself it meant nothing. Buildings don't wait. Lights don't expect. That night, lying in bed, I found myself thinking about the way the room inside had looked untouched. Not closed. Not finished for the day. Pause. The thought followed me longer than it should have. After that, I started noticing smaller things. The way the lights looked the same even when it rained. The way the windows never fogged. The way there was never a sign saying closed. No hours posted. No notices. Just light. I didn't tell anyone. There was nothing to tell. But I began to feel, quietly, that the building knew my schedule better than I did. And that was when the idea first crossed my mind that I was no longer just passing by it. I was part of its routine now. After that night, I stopped pretending I hadn't noticed. I didn't think about it directly. Not in full sentences. It was more like a low awareness that followed me through the day. I would be at work, reading emails, answering questions, doing things that required just enough attention to feel real. And somewhere beneath all of it, I knew what time it was getting close to. Not because I was hungry. Not because I needed anything. Because the lights would be on. They always were. I didn't go every night. At least, that's what I told myself. But whenever my route took me past that street after midnight, my eyes moved there automatically. As if checking in. Same brightness. Same stillness. Same sense that nothing inside had shifted since the last time I looked. No chairs moved. No signs of cleaning. No variation in the color of the light. It was the same scene, replayed without effort. I started noticing the pattern in my own body before I noticed it in my thoughts. A slight tightening in my chest when I was running late. A small release when I saw the glow from a distance, as if I would have been disappointed if it wasn't there. One night, I took a different route home. Not to avoid it, just to see if I would. The city felt unfamiliar that way. The streets were quieter. The turns felt less practiced. I realized I was checking the time more often. When I finally parked at my apartment, I sat in the car longer than usual. The silence pressed in. There was nothing wrong with it, but it felt unfinished. I went inside. That night, I dreamed of light. Not the restaurant. Just light. Rooms without corners. Surfaces without texture. When I woke up, my mouth felt dry. Not thirsty. Just empty. The next night, I drove past the McDonald's again. I didn't tell myself I was doing it on purpose. The parking lot was empty, the way it always was. But something had changed. There was a car at the drive-thru. Just one. Its brake lights glowed red against the whitewash of the building. The contrast made everything else feel dimmer. I slowed without realizing it. The car didn't move. No one spoke from the speaker. No menu lights flickered. The car just waited. I waited too. For a moment, I had the strange sense that if the car moved forward, something would reset. That things would go back to the way they were. It didn't. After a while, I drove past. In my rearview mirror, the car was still there. The next day, I thought about that car more than I should have. Who was inside it? Why they were waiting? How long they had been there before I arrived? I imagined the driver checking the time, adjusting their grip on the steering wheel, listening to the engine idle. I imagined them deciding not to leave. That night there were two cars. They were spaced evenly. Not close. Not far. It looked intentional. I parked across the street again, farther this time. I turned off the engine. Without the sound of it, the night felt too open. The lights inside the building didn't flicker when the cars pulled forward. They didn't respond at all. I realized then that the lights weren't reacting to people. People were reacting to the lights. That thought settled into me slowly, like something heavy finding its place. I noticed that once a car joined the line, it stayed. No one backed out. No doors opened. They just waited. I told myself it was coincidence. Late-night customers. Long lines. But I had been alive long enough to recognize when coincidence stopped behaving randomly. After that, I started timing it. Cars arrived most often between 12:30 and 1. They didn't arrive all at once. They drifted in, as if pulled. I never joined the line. Not yet. I stayed on the outside, watching, counting, noticing. And every night, when I left, there were more cars than when I arrived. That was the rule. I didn't invent it. I just observed it. More cars in, none out. The city felt quieter now. Not asleep. Held. And I began to understand that whatever this was, it wasn't growing. It was filling. I told myself I was still in control. That was the phrase I used. Not out loud. Just quietly, the way you reassure yourself when no one is listening. I hadn't joined the line. I hadn't eaten anything. I hadn't done what the others were doing. I was only watching. Observation felt safe, neutral, like standing on the edge of a pool without getting wet. During the day, the thought of the place felt distant, smaller, almost ridiculous. Sunlight flattened everything. The city behaved the way it was supposed to. Traffic lights changed. Stores closed. I could almost convince myself that the night version of the city was exaggerated by fatigue. Almost. But every evening, as the light outside softened and the air cooled, something in my body adjusted. Not anticipation. Alignment. My shoulders relaxed at the same hour every night. My thoughts slowed. I stopped making plans after 10. Not consciously. I just didn't schedule anything there anymore. Friends asked why I was harder to reach. I said I was tired. That wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole shape of it. One night, I stayed home on purpose. I made tea. I turned on a lamp instead of the overhead light. I tried to create a boundary. The room felt too quiet. Every sound arrived too clearly. The ticking of the clock. The low hum of the refrigerator. My own breathing when I noticed it. I kept checking the time. Not waiting for anything specific. Just tracking it. When midnight passed, I felt a faint pressure behind my eyes. Not pain. More like something unresolved. I told myself that habits form easily. That the mind looks for patterns even when there are none. I listed explanations. 24-hour location. Staff shortage. Night shift automation. I searched online. There was nothing unusual. No comments. No reviews mentioning the lights. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made the whole thing feel more private. Like something not meant to be discussed. That night, I dreamed I was sitting in my car. The engine was off. The radio was silent. Ahead of me, a red glow. Brake lights. I woke up before anything happened. The next evening, I drove again. Not straight there. Just near. I told myself I wanted to see if the pattern would break. It didn't. The same number of cars as the night before. One more joining as I watched. I noticed something else then. None of the cars had their headlights on. Only the brake lights, red against white, as if everyone had already stopped. I felt a strange urge to count backward. I don't know where that came from. The numbers didn't matter. The motion did. Like preparing for something without knowing what it was. I wondered what would happen if I joined. Not in a dramatic way. Not as a challenge. Just practically. Would the speaker turn on? Would someone ask my order? Or would the car simply roll forward, inch by inch, until there was nowhere left to go? That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. At home, I stood in the kitchen and opened the fridge. I wasn't hungry. I ate anyway. Not much. Just enough to feel occupied. The food tasted flat. I chewed slowly, listening to the quiet. I realized then that hunger had nothing to do with it. None of this did. It wasn't about eating. It was about being placed somewhere and not leaving. That idea frightened me more than anything I had seen so far. Because it felt familiar. I remembered waiting rooms, lines, forms. Moments where the correct action was to sit still and comply. I had always been good at that. That night, as I lay in bed, I knew I was approaching a decision. Not a big one. Nothing dramatic. Just a small adjustment. A step closer. And I knew, with a clarity that didn't feel like fear, that once I made it, watching would no longer be enough. I didn't decide anything that night. That's how it felt later, when I tried to remember the moment clearly. There was no sharp line. No sentence in my head that said now. The decision arrived the way sleep does. Gradually. Without asking permission. The next evening followed the same shape as the others. Dinner at home. Lights dimmed. The familiar quiet settling into the walls. I checked my phone and noticed it was already later than I thought. That kept happening. Time slipping forward without resistance. I put on my jacket. Not because I planned to go anywhere specific. Just because it felt like the correct layer for the air. Outside, the night was mild. Still. No wind. The street lights hummed softly. I walked to my car and sat for a moment with the door open, listening. Nothing unusual. That should have been enough to stop me. Instead, I closed the door. The drive was automatic. Muscle memory. Turns taken without conscious thought. I told myself I would stop nearby. Just park. Just confirm the pattern again. When the glow appeared at the end of the street, it felt closer than usual. Not brighter. Closer. The parking lot was fuller tonight. The line moved slowly, but it moved. That detail mattered to me more than it should have. Movement meant process. Process meant purpose. I pulled in behind the last car. There was no jolt of fear. Just a soft internal click, like something settling into place. The engine idled. The brake lights ahead glowed steadily. I waited. The speaker crackled once, then went silent. No greeting. No prompt. I stayed still. I could have backed out. I thought about that. The space behind me was open, clear. Leaving would have been easy. But the car ahead rolled forward. Just a little. I followed. The line absorbed me without resistance. I noticed then that the building's windows reflected the cars perfectly. Red lights repeating into themselves. I watched my own reflection, distorted in the glass. Not my face. Just the shape of the car. Anonymous. Replaceable. When I reached the speaker, nothing happened. No voice. No menu lighting up. The car behind me stopped close enough that I could feel its presence. Not pressure. Expectation. I didn't speak. That felt important. Silence seemed to be the correct response. The line advanced again. I followed. At the pickup window, the light was on. The window slid open halfway. A bag was already there. Brown paper. Folded neatly. I hesitated. The moment stretched. I could still leave. I could wave it away. Shake my head. Instead, I reached out and took it. The window closed immediately. No sound. No acknowledgement. I pulled forward, heart steady, hands calm. I parked across the street and sat with the engine off. The bag rested on the passenger seat. It was warm. Not fresh hot. Just maintain. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The choice wasn't about what was inside. It was about accepting that something had been prepared for me without my request. I drove home with the bag untouched. I placed it on the counter. I washed my hands. I sat down. I waited for a feeling that never came. No fear. No excitement. Just a sense of completion. That night, I slept deeply. Without dreams. Morning came the same way it always had. Light through the blinds. The quiet hum of the refrigerator. The sense that the day had already started without asking me. I lay still longer than usual. Not because I was tired. Because I was listening. Nothing felt wrong. That unsettled me more than fear ever had. I got up and walked into the kitchen. The bag was gone. I stopped in the doorway and waited for my mind to catch up. The counter was clean. No paper. No smell. The trash was empty. I stood there, feeling the temperature of the room, the firmness of the floor under my feet, the familiar ache in my lower back. Everything was ordinary. I told myself I must have thrown it away. That explanation slid into place too easily. I made coffee. I drank it slowly. On the way to work, I passed the restaurant. The lights were still on. They always were. At lunch, someone mentioned the place casually. Just a comment. Just background noise. No one questioned it. That night, I didn't drive anywhere. I stayed home. I turned off all the lights except one. I sat on the couch and waited for hunger. It came right on time. Not strong. Just enough. I opened the fridge. There was food I didn't remember buying. Nothing strange. Nothing specific. Just there. I ate without thinking about it. Later, lying in bed, I realized something simple. I hadn't thought about the drive-through all evening. That was new. Days passed. Then weeks. The lights never turned off. I stopped checking. That felt like progress. Sometimes, driving home late, I would notice the glow in my peripheral vision and feel nothing at all. No curiosity. No resistance. Just recognition. Like a landmark you no longer read the sign for. One night, I woke up briefly around the same hour as before. I didn't get out of bed. I didn't look at the clock. I stayed still and listened to my own breathing. It sounded practiced, rehearsed, as if my body had learned something my mind was no longer involved in. In the morning, my shoes were by the door, laced. I stood over them for a long time, trying to remember moving them. Nothing came. I left them there. The city didn't change. People went to work. Kids waited for buses. Stores opened and closed. Only one place stayed exactly the same. Sometimes I think about the moment I could have backed out of the line. The space behind me. The ease of leaving. That memory feels distant now. Flattened. Like something that happened to someone else. The lights are still on tonight. They will be tomorrow. And if I pass by without noticing, that will mean it's already too late. I don't check anymore. I don't need to. The city knows when I'm hungry.